Welcome to WhaleFest Monterey 2018. Thank you so much for taking part of your beautiful day that we're having out there and coming in and sharing it with us. We have some outstanding speakers. We've already had a couple. We've got another that's just going to knock your socks off, and his name is Adam Ratner. He's with the Marine Mammal Center, and currently he is researching saving species in Monterey Bay and looking at ways that species either exist here, coexist here, and I think it might be up and down the coast. He knows a lot more about what he's talking about than I do, though. So I have to assure you that. Fascinated they're studying the Guadalupe fur seals, which I'd never heard of before, and of course the southern sea otters, and also something called Domoic acid. Again, I have no idea what it is, but it's exciting because it could be very, very helpful, both to species and to people. Okay, currently Adam oversees the visitor operations at the center, along with doing a whole lot of other things. So please, a warm welcome for Adam Ratner.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. It's always exciting to come out and be able to share some of the stories of what's happening just right off our coastline in Monterey, but all up and down the California coast. As Steve mentioned, I'm with the Marine Mammal Center, and I'm just curious by show of hands, how many people in the group have been to see the Marine Mammal Center up in Sausalito? Excellent, fair amount of you, wonderful. So I am based out of our hospital in Sausalito, and I want to share a few different stories with you today about the work that's happening throughout all of our California rescue range. I wanted to start, though, with giving you just a little bit of a background on my story, though. I've been with the Marine Mammal Center now for 9 years, but my background's really in the research side of things. So looking at animal behavior, animal learning, animal communication. And I spent years in labs all around the country looking at some of that with things like bird hearing and speech, fish learning and memory. And through those years, I realized a few things. The first is that I'm not actually a huge fan of birds. Different story, though. And I started looking into marine mammals, and I was just really fascinated because I can go into a classroom with a group of first graders, and I can hold up a picture of a blue whale, and every student can identify that animal. And there's something truly magical about that concept. But 9 years ago, before I started at the Marine Mammal Center, I walked up to one of the best blue whale biologists in the entire world, and I asked what I thought was an incredibly simple question. I asked, where do blue whales give birth? And he couldn't answer me. This is an animal that is bigger than a basketball court. It's the largest animal ever to roam the planet, and it's an endangered species. But we didn't even know where they spent a few months out of the year. That was this disconnect and this moment where I realized that I needed to move a little bit farther outside of just the research field and into the conservation field, because every day I was hearing these stories of whales that were getting entangled or seals and sea lions that were getting sick. And that's what brought me to the Marine Mammal Center. And the very short story for what we do there is we're the world's largest marine mammal hospital and education facility. So we're going to take care of any sick or hurt seal, sea lion, whale, dolphin, otter. And not just animals that are right here in Monterey or right near our hospital in Sausalito, but we're actually taking care of animals over 600 miles of California coast. So from the very top of Mendocino County in the north to the very bottom in San Luis Obispo. All the animals go to our main hospital in Sausalito, around 2 hours away. But we've got a triage site just a few minutes from here in Moss Landing. We've got an amazing team of volunteers down in San Luis Obispo that are responding to animals down there, and then also up north with Fort Bragg and Anchor Bay. And we've been doing this work now for over 40 years. We've been able to save 23,000 marine mammals. And just a few years ago, we were able to take all of what we learned and bring it out to the animals that needed it the most out in Hawaii, the endangered Hawaiian monk seal. And now have a hospital on the big island of Hawaii where we can give this best care to them and raise awareness efforts to really save a species. In just the last 3 years since we opened up our hospital, we've been able to save 2% of the entire population of Hawaiian monk seals. And with all of this work, it starts actually with people like you. So we've got an amazing team of volunteers that are going to rescue these animals. We'll rescue 600 to 800 animals every single year. But they're not going to just let us know they need help. They're not kind of walking up the hill, checking themselves into a room. It's people like you that see an animal that's sick or hurt out on the beach here in Monterey or up and down that range and can let us know. We have a 24-hour hotline. It ends in SEAL, so we try and make it easy on you. And we'll be able to dispatch our team out there with these big rescue boards, these nets and carriers to rescue anything ranging from a 2-day-old harbor seal that's been separated from its mom to a 500-pound sea lion that's suffering from a disease or a toxin. We'll rescue the animal, we'll stabilize it, transport it up to Sausalito, where we can give it a second chance at life. Any test you can get at a human hospital, x-rays, surgeries, brain scans, we can do it in Sausalito. We actually did cataract surgery on a baby elephant seal to restore its vision for the first time in its life. All these different opportunities that we can get this animal better, and the day they feel better is the day they head back out to the ocean again. Just this past year, over 350 animals got a second chance at life through all of your help, the people that are calling it in and reporting animals to us, but also this amazing community of support that's helping us to give the care to the animals and support what that costs as well. We run off of volunteers. I'm one of the lucky 70 staff, but we have 1,200 volunteers that help us, a few of which are actually in the room today. But this is a group that starts at age 15. They go up to age 97. We don't even cut it off at 97. This is a group that does the medical procedures, the feedings, the rescues, the cleanings. And then it's the general public and people like you and me that help support all this. All the funding we get as a nonprofit is going to help care for these animals, give them a second chance at life. And with our work, it's not just about rescuing, rehabilitating, and releasing the animals, though. At a certain point, we have to make sure the animals stop getting sick in the first place. And this is where I get really excited in the work that I do at the center. It comes down to some of the science and the research that we're doing. So whether it's when we're rescuing animals and actually diagnosing them, we were the first to discover things like cancer in California sea lions. And it turns out to be one of the highest rates of cancer of any wild animal population in the entire world. It might be the new treatment methods that we come up with, ways that we can do cataract surgery or treat a toxin that the animals get. And it's these collaborations. You heard a little bit from the speakers earlier today about the diversity of animals in the Monterey Bay National Sanctuary, but this open ocean and how these animals traverse this huge ocean that we have in our own backyards. So working with partners all around the world for what we learn, we can then share out to protect not just the animals in Monterey, but all around the globe. And then where my role comes in a little bit more is really sharing that out. So trying to be as accessible as possible. We've got 100,000 people that can come through our hospital in Sausalito, different events that we do. For example, you can go and visit our booth outside to learn more about the work our Monterey Bay volunteers are doing, but also ways that we can engage young ones, whether it's through our summer camp programs or our Seals and Slippers or working with schools and going out to the schools to turn them into a marine mammal laboratory for the day. And then volunteer programs so that people can get hands-on experience actually helping to give these animals a second chance. Now, with all of that work, that's kind of the broad scale of what we do at the Marine Mammal Center. But what I wanted to spend my time doing with you today is telling you 3 stories. I want to tell you the story of Mr. Bucky, I want to tell you the story of Yankee Doodle, and I want to tell you the story of Furmarina. Now, every patient we rescue, anywhere between 600 and 800 a year, it starts with this phone call from someone like you out on the beach. The person who actually calls us, reports the animal, sticks around until we get there, gets to name them. So that's why we get these weird ones up here. We rescued 23,000 animals. We can't have like 12 Lindsays running around our hospital. So basically every animal gets a different name. So you can think about what kind of creative names you'll come up with if you spot an animal later today. But I wanted to kind of dive into these stories because each animal we rescue has a really unique story to tell. And it's not just that animal, but it gives us a glimpse into the health of a population as well as the health of the ocean as a whole. So I want to start with Mr. Bucky here. Now, this is an animal, family was walking down the beach. This is in Monterey County at Marina State Beach. You've probably been there if you live in the area. And they came across this animal that did not look well, to say the least. So this animal was kind of curled up in a ball, almost fetal position-esque. As they noticed it, they realized the animal was actually tremoring. It was having seizures. Obviously, that's not good. So they got on the phone, they gave us a call, we got out there. Now, this was a pretty big animal. So this was an animal that was a little over 200 pounds. We got him to the hospital, and we know that there's not a lot that can cause seizures in California sea lions. So we did a couple of very quick tests. We realized this was an animal suffering from something called Domoic acid toxicosis. You heard Steve kind of joke a little bit about it, not knowing what it is. I'm just curious, how many people have heard of Domoic acid toxicosis? All right. I've been doing this for 9 years. I can tell you right now, back in 2012, 2013, 2014, basically no one was raising their hand. These days, I'm getting a lot better attention to it, and there's a reason for that I'll explain. The good news, despite sounding so terrifying and terrible, is that this is something, if it's caught in time, we get that phone call from someone like you, we can give them anti-seizure medications, we can flush that toxin out of them with fluids and lots of good food, and in the case of Mr. Bucky, it took 1 month before he was healthy, happy, and headed back out to the ocean with one of his penmates right over here. Now, this was something where if you take just one animal in isolation, you might not get all the answers that you need. But when rescuing hundreds of them every single year, all of a sudden you start to see a picture of what's happening out in the ocean. And that leads us to this toxin itself, domoic acid. Now, this is something you might hear referred to as red tide in the news. It's very similar to that. It just doesn't turn the water red, it turns the water green, like most algae will. But this is a toxin that's produced from an algae, and algae is great. We need algae. Every other breath we take starts with the algae. But some algae, if you get too much of it, can release a toxin. That toxin then enters the food chain, and fish start eating that toxin, and then seals or sea lions start eating that toxic fish. And you can get an idea of my rather rudimentary food chain drawing here. But similar to what you hear about with stories of mercury, same concept. It's accumulating as it gets up the food chain. And this can become really dangerous for both animals and for people. It was actually first discovered in people. It was referred to as amnesic shellfish poisoning. And back in the 1980s, people were dying from this. So all of a sudden, people were sitting down, they were eating all of this shellfish, things like mussels or oysters or clams. And then all of a sudden, they were having memory loss, they were very disoriented, and people got very, very sick. This was also something that we believe inspired The Birds, the Alfred Hitchcock movie. They weren't quite falling out of the sky, but they were quite disoriented. And we know that this is something that has impacted animals in the past. But it wasn't until 1998 when all of a sudden, right here in Monterey and down in the Big Sur area, we started getting phone calls from animals that were having, or about animals that were having seizures out on the beach. And this was the time where we actually were the first to discover and diagnose domoic acid in marine mammals. All of a sudden, we now actually have this huge clue into the health of the ocean, though. We know that the seals and sea lions are getting it from eating toxic fish, the same fish that we love to eat. Now we have a canary in the coal mine. So over the last 20 years, we've been cataloging all of these different cases, been able to put together what we refer to as the health map. It looks at where are these outbreaks of the toxin so that we can start to prioritize both the rescue and response efforts for marine mammals, but also work with public health officials to make sure that people aren't getting sick. So I mentioned earlier, 5-6 years ago, I'd go out and I'd talk to people about domoic acid toxicosis, and they would never have heard of it before. It was this big, long, scary word. These days, it's something you hear about a lot more, and the reason for that is because this was why we couldn't eat Dungeness crab a few years ago. The amounts were so high that all of a sudden it became extraordinarily dangerous to eat the food. Well, what we do is every time, since we started this back in 1998, we see a sea lion or a fur seal that has domoic acid toxicosis. We get on the phone, we call the California Department of Public Health. They're able to ramp up testing of the food we eat to make sure that we're never eating toxic fish. Ever since we discovered this in 1998, there hasn't been a single death in people. So this is the canary in the coal mine, except what I love about it is that we can save the canary. This is a way that not only can we help take care of sick and hurt marine mammals that deserve a second chance, we can make sure people aren't getting sick either. And this is something we've been seeing a lot of recently. In the last 3 years, over 400 California sea lions have come in, just like Mr. Bucky, having seizures out on the beach and needing our help. We've been able to get the animals better. We've been able to work with the California Department of Public Health to make sure that people aren't getting sick, and starting to think about ways that we can prevent this from happening in the future. We know that things like increased fertilizer runoff can increase these algal blooms. We know that things like warmer water temperatures or more acidic water could increase these algal blooms. So how can we take action in our own lives, whether it's around fertilizer use or fossil fuel use, to help make sure that it's a healthy ocean, both for the marine mammals, but so that we can continue eating Dungeness crab in the future. I know the Fisherman's Wharf would love that concept. Now, the other thing is that we can take this research and not only help the seals and sea lions, but we've found that the way domoic acid affects the animals, it attacks the heart, weakens the heartbeat. It also attacks the brain, and it affects the hippocampus, kind of the GPS system of the brain, makes them very disoriented. It attacks the hippocampus in a really unique way, though. Our bodies, everything that happens with the human body tries to be as symmetrical as possible. Domoic acid is asymmetrical. It only attacks one side of the hippocampus. And this is not seen in medicine very often. There's actually only one other condition where we see it, and it's temporal lobe epilepsy in people. So what we do is if we rescue a sea lion with domoic acid toxicosis and it passes away, maybe it's not caught in time or the damage is so severe, what we do is we actually partner with Stanford School of Medicine because they're able to look at the brain and actually start to get clues into temporal lobe epilepsy in people. So this is moving the needle both on marine mammal health and human health. And one way that no matter what's wrong with these animals, we're able to take it, help them, but it goes into this much bigger picture of ocean health and human health alike. Now, Mr. Bucky and domoic acid is one of the many stories that we see taking place here in Monterey and up and down our range. But we also see others. For example, the adorable sea otter. I know we don't play favorites with marine mammals, but I think this is the favorite for Monterey at least. Now, Yankee Doodle picked up to the kind of northern part of the Monterey Bay Sanctuary, so picked up in San Mateo County at Breakwater Beach. People were walking along the beach. They saw this animal, 4 to 5 years old, decent weight, 57, 60 pounds or so. But something was, again, very wrong. They actually saw this animal tremoring and having seizures. Well, we can help with that. So we got a team out, and we realized that Yankee Doodle also had domoic acid toxicosis, had a parasite as well, something called toxoplasmosis. This is what's in cat feces, so why you shouldn't flush your cat litter down the toilet, if you've ever heard that story. Now, Yankee Doodle, this was an animal that we rescued right on 4th of July, hence the name. Got to the hospital, took a lot of time to really try and diagnose and figure out what was happening. It took close to 4 months before he was healthy and happy. But at that point, we brought him back down to Breakwater Beach. We let him go, happy and healthy. Now, even though this story mirrors Mr. Bucky, it's different in a fair amount of ways. So we've got the same disease, but a very different species. Now, sea otters, even though they're so loved, you can see them within a few-minute walk of where you're sitting right now. This is still a threatened species. There are only around 3,000 of them left in California. So this is an animal that we want to take every action to protect if we want to keep them around. The other thing is that we actually don't know as much about sea otters as you might think. So the Marine Mammal Center has been rescuing sea otters over our 40-plus year history. We spent many years doing rehabilitation work. We work very closely with the Monterey Bay Aquarium that has an amazing sea otter program. And over the last couple years, I've been working to increase our rehabilitation efforts for them as well, and building pens and enclosures for them up in Sausalito so it can give them a second chance. Well, this past year, we started being able to bring in more and more of these sea otters, and Yankee Doodle was one of the first ones we brought in 2017, and it turns out that this was one of the first ever cases of domoic acid toxicosis in sea otters. We knew that they got it. We had seen carcasses and animals that had died out on the beach with domoic acid, but no one had ever tried taking care of an animal and getting it better when it was found with domoic acid. So our veterinary team worked closely with experts from around the globe to think about what can we have learned from those sea lions to give to the sea otter to really be able to give it the second chance. So we did a lot of these different procedures and really set the stage for how any sea otter coming in the future that has this toxin can get treated and go back out to the wild. And we were able to do that. We gave him fake kelp to play around in to make sure he kept his wild instincts. We did various exams looking at the kind of status of his brain and his behavioral response to different stimulus. And this then allowed us to make sure he could go back out to the wild with a second chance. But we didn't just want to let him go and say, hey, we fixed him, he looked fine. We wanted to make sure he was actually doing okay. So we implanted 2 different types of tags inside of his stomach, inside of his abdomen. And this was a scientific first as well. We were able to put a radio tag so we could actually have a transmission from him. We also put something called a life history tag. And this was going to record his entire life worth of data. So from the moment we released him until whenever he passes away out in the wild. Could be a couple years, it could be a decade or 2 down the road. And we were going to be able to monitor how this animal is doing out in the wild and see some of the threats that these animals face as they go through their life. We could get things like body temperature, could get depth and pressure and things along those lines. So we got this into him. We sent some of our teams out to monitor this animal, and he's doing great. He pulled an interesting move, I'll be honest with you. We let him go in San Mateo County, right where we found him. And he's kind of a juvenile male. He's a teenager. And every once in a while, these teenager males decide to go a little rogue. So just a couple days after we released him down in San Mateo, popped up at Point Reyes. He is setting up his own little enclosure right up there. But we still see him. He's diving down, grabbing crab, coming back up, eating it. He's going to have these tags with him for his entire life. So we're going to be able to make sure that whatever he's engaging with, whether it's up in Point Reyes or right back down here in Monterey, we're able to really move that animal and that species forward so that we can help bring that population even farther up from its threatened status. The last animal I wanted to speak to is one that most people have never actually even heard of before. It's called the Guadalupe furseal. I'm just curious, how many people have heard of it before? All right, like 5 of those hands don't count because they're volunteers at the Marine Mammal Center, so very few people. Now, Guadalupe furseals, they kind of look like furry versions of Yoda from Star Wars. This is a threatened species as well, and we found a 10-month-old, a pup, in Monterey County, Weston Beach. We named it Furmarina after one of the volunteers that was such an integral part of the Monterey Bay operation community. And this family that was walking along, they found this animal. This animal was skin and bones. This wasn't like Mr. Bucky, wasn't like the otter. This animal was super skinny, and it was young, less than 1 year old. Well, we brought it back to the hospital. This is an animal that was struggling to find food, half the body weight that it really should have been. So we can help with that. We make sure that the animal can dive and grab fish. They eat a lot of fish. After a couple weeks, animal healthy, happy, able to head back out into the ocean again. Now, when it comes to Guadalupe furseals, this is not an animal people know of very much. I wanted to give you a little bit of backstory here, and then we'll come back to Furmarina's story. But to give you an idea, this is an animal that used to be hunted. They have more fur than the regular kind of seals and sea lions that you hear about. And about the size of a quarter, it's around 300,000 hairs. So 3 human head shaved to get the size of a postage stamp on these guys. And they were hunted to essentially extinction. We thought we wiped them out before 1900 rolled around. Then, all of a sudden, we found a small group of them in the 1950s. 200, 500 or so. We've started protecting these animals. Their population's been growing, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 right now with the last estimates. This is great news. Now, they are still listed as threatened. This is not an animal that's out of the woods yet when we think about the threats they face, the location they're in. But as we then think about what are the ways that we can protect these animals, it ties back to the story I shared earlier about the blue whale. We don't know a lot about some of these animals. So when we look at the Guadalupe fur seal, you look at the best textbooks, you're only going to get a little bit of information. What you're going to get is that they're from Guadalupe Island. There's a reason they got their name. So this is a small island off the coast of Mexico. Now, there's a really small group in this second red kind of bubble that just popped up in Baja. And then pretty recently, there's a really, really tiny group that's been found at the Channel Islands. Other than that, those are kind of the only 3 places that they're being seen and found. What we think, and what you see in all the textbooks, is this is an animal that doesn't tend to migrate. Guadalupe fur seals hang out around Guadalupe Island, or hang around the Channel Islands. That's it. So when we're rescuing Guadalupe fur seals in our rescue range, which is San Luis Obispo up to Mendocino, it's because something's wrong. They've kind of gotten lost, they're sick, they find their way onto our coast. And we've got data for over 40 years of rescuing Guadalupe fur seals. I've only got one graph, this entire thing. It's up here. And what you notice is, our first 40 years or so, maybe we rescued a handful, 1 to 3. And then all of a sudden, we get to 2015. So when we look at our first 40 years of rescuing animals, we rescued 60 of them. In the last 3 years, we've rescued close to 75. So something dramatic is happening with this threatened species. Now, many of the animals were coming in looking like Furmarina, these skinny 1-year-olds that were just struggling to find food out in a changing ocean. We know that over the last 3 years in particular, the water temperatures have been much warmer than normal. Things like the blob, if you heard about that in the news, or El Nino, things like climate change that play a role. And this can push the fish that these animals and sea lions love to eat deeper and farther offshore, so it makes it harder for those young ones to actually find the food. It might make it harder for the moms when they're nursing to find the food and come back and nurse. So a lot of animals struggling to find food. We also know that a good number of these animals we've rescued, of those 135, are also animals that are coming in entangled in trash, various types of fishing nets or other plastic pollution. So we've got these 2 big threats that they face: the issue of malnutrition and not being able to find food, and then interacting with things that are man-made out in nature. But that's where a lot of the science kind of stopped, because we thought they're non-migratory. We thought that they were down at Guadalupe Island, and what we were getting up here were just ones that had gotten lost and sick. But there was no proof of that. So what we looked at is we looked at where do these animals go. And in the picture you see with the release, there's something on that animal's back. It's a satellite tag. You can't use these on all of our animals. They're around $5,000 a piece. So as a nonprofit, we have to be a little selective. But all of a sudden in 2015, what we realized is these animals were getting sick. But we have an opportunity now, because we've never seen this number of Guadalupe fur seals. And over the previous kind of history of science, for lack of better words, only 5 Guadalupe fur seals had ever been tracked. That was our data. That was what made us think these animals were non-migratory. Well, let's get these Guadalupe fur seals at the hospital better. Let's get them back out into the ocean, and let's follow them. And in the last 3 years, we've been able to track 25 Guadalupe fur seals. And all of a sudden, we now know their migration pattern. We've been able to solve this mystery so that not only can we help protect the Guadalupe fur seals that get sick, but we can actually help take action to protect them out in the wild. Now, we were all sitting around the table thinking about, all right, where did these animals go? When we released Furmarina, where does she go? Everyone thought, you go to Guadalupe Island. It's where you're from, it's where you should go. Didn't happen. Went north. And not just a little north, like Washington State north. Okay, this is interesting. Kind of picked the wrong direction. Maybe this is an animal just a little disoriented, got lost once type of thing. Let's put the tags on the other 24 Guadalupe fur seals. All of them went north. We were just wrong. From a scientific perspective, we didn't have data. We thought, yes, they're found on Guadalupe Island. We don't really see them on the mainland in California at all, so they must be hanging out over there. Turns out this is an animal that just lives offshore, but uses all of this habitat that we share with them. All right, we've got this bit of data. We know what our marine mammals do. What about the wild ones? Because animals that are coming in sick and injured, that could be bias. So let's partner with other groups. Let's go out to Guadalupe Island and actually put tags on wild, healthy marine mammals and see where they go. They did the exact same thing. We put close to 40 tags on these animals. The green dot that you see up at the top, that's basically San Francisco. And you realize these animals are coming right up off our coastline. They're spending time in Monterey Bay. They're spending time close to the Greater Farallon Sanctuary. This is an animal that if we think about those threats they face, malnutrition, we think about the threats around ocean trash, we can take action on this. We can help inform policy. We can help take action in our own lives to protect this animal that calls the same area that we call home. Now, we think about where we've been able to go with some of these different stories. Through the Guadalupe fur seals, up until 2015, 5 Guadalupe fur seals have been tagged. You look at the data today, we're close to 70 that have gotten tags. So we're able to learn about some of these threatened species to help protect the larger population and think about how we create a healthier ocean for all of the animals. Because the goal for all of them, just like Furmarina, the day they feel better is the day they head back out to the ocean. And this is a way that we can keep them safe while we're out there at the same time. So that's what I have for all of you. I want to leave time for questions, and I'll show some cute pictures of marine mammals while we do it, because why not? I do encourage you, please go check out our booth as well. There's some great stories, things that you can touch and feel to get a sense of what makes these animals so special. And you have a chance to talk with some of our Monterey Bay volunteers that are on the front lines doing these rescues, helping to give them a second chance. So please take advantage of that today. But without further ado, I'll open it up for any questions that you might have. Great question. So the question was, where is the Marine Mammal Center located? So our rescue range is 600 miles, so Mendocino County in the north to San Luis Obispo County in the south. Our main hospital is in Sausalito. It's in the Marin Headlands, so right across the Golden Gate Bridge. But we have small triage sites that are not open to the public, but allow us to do great work in Moss Landing as well as in Morro Bay to the south. Excellent. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this thing in the corner here. Yes. So kind of the question was, what is the purpose of this wooden board that you see kind of in the corner here? Whenever we're around the animals, feeding, cleaning, rescue, release, always have these boards. The first is that it's kind of like a big riot shield. These animals, they don't know we're trying to help them. They have incredibly sharp teeth, so it's a way that we make sure we don't get hurt. We can use it to help guide or herd an animal in a particular direction, so when we're trying to rescue them, we can get them into that carrier. The other part is around bonding and trying to make sure that they don't get too used to people. Our goal is to get them back out to the wild. So if they get too accustomed to people, if they think we're a good thing for them, they might not share those same wild instincts, and they might not be able to forage on their own. So any efforts that we do throughout the rehab process to break that bonding is going to help the animal really survive out on their own. Great question. Yeah.
So these fur seals are living well off coast.
Mm-hmm.
They rarely come ashore.
Yes.
Where they feed on and kind of a lifestyle.
Great question. So kind of what is the lifestyle? Where are these Guadalupe fur seals going? They essentially never come up onto the California mainland. It's a reason why no one has really ever heard of them before. They spend all their time out in the middle of the open ocean or offshore islands. We know that they're a slightly deeper water animal, so they're going not quite necessarily, if people were here from the very first talk, about that kind of mid-trophic zone, but they are going after things like lanternfish. They are going after things like squid. They will eat small schooling fish as well, so herring, anchovies, mackerel, but a slightly different environment and behavior than something like your California sea lion that you see right along the coast that's going almost predominantly off of things like the small schooling fish.
So is Guadalupe Island maybe a place where they go to club?
Yes. So Guadalupe Island is without a doubt a major breeding ground. So we know that those three places, Channel Island, San Benito Island, and Guadalupe Island, are the breeding grounds. Like there's a reason they got their name, Guadalupe fur seal. What we thought is that they just stick around those islands, and that's where we were wrong. What they're doing is they're making this huge migration up north, and then what we saw when we used these tags is that they were coming back down to the Guadalupe Island come breeding season. Yeah.
They tend to be actually on the move north as the climate modifies and creates, warm water conditions that don't have enough oxygen. Everything goes north. So could that be one of the reasons that they're moving north too?
It's a great question. So kind of what is the behavior of this fish? And we know that that is playing a huge role. So with the warmer water temperatures, seals and sea lions are pretty adaptive. They're not going to necessarily feel or change based off the difference of 1 or 2 degrees Fahrenheit, but the fish definitely change, and that's going to then impact the seals and sea lions. So a few years ago, in 2015, is when we saw the water temperatures all of a sudden skyrocket off the California coast. We were getting temperature readings of 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal. That's like a full-blown fever out in the Pacific Ocean. And you're exactly right. The fish, they were going deeper in some cases, try and find that colder water, or they were heading north. And that was one of the theories we had when we released the first Guadalupe fur seals and they went north. And maybe it's that that's not where they're normally supposed to go, but that's where the food is. So that's why we've been doing studies over the last 3 years, and particularly why we went down to Guadalupe Island to try and tag the wild ones to see, all right, if you've got adults, these animals are big, they're healthy, they can dive deeper. They don't necessarily need to swim up to Oregon or Washington State. But it turns out they were still coming pretty far north. Not as far north as Washington State, so we think perhaps that was related to the warm water temperatures of 2015. But we can start to get a sense that even if the water temperatures in 2015 weren't due to climate change, we now know how these animals will react in a future of climate change if we don't take action. And this allows us then to start coming up with solutions for how to mitigate the problems that might be happening. I think I've got time for one more question, but then I will stick around, I promise. Yeah.
The interplay between these 4 types that you've shown us, is there any relationship? Are they spurned off, mixed match, whatever? What do we know about the interplay? Because they're sharing the same region, and they look similar.
Yeah, without a doubt. So there are lots of different types of marine mammals that call Monterey Bay home and all along the California coast. You heard the term Serengeti of this sea. There are 6 different types of seals and sea lions in California. They're all separate species, so they're not going to be able to reproduce. They tend to simply just ignore each other, to be honest with you, even though they have the shared environment. Things like the Monterey Coast Guard jetty, you might see like 400 California sea lions there. A harbor seal would not be caught dead anywhere right near that. They like their own little space, but you can literally walk out the front doors and see a harbor seal in the water like in a few moments. So they do share similar diets when you look at the seals and sea lions, but kind of have their own separate social structures and behaviors, if that helps. All right. Maybe one last question? Yeah. Yeah, so each one has slightly different behaviors without a doubt. The California sea lions do stay relatively coastal, although they can get out to kind of continental shelf. You might see them like 20, 26 miles offshore or so in different areas. The harbor seals, definitely going to stay a little bit shallower water. But each animal kind of has its own little preference. So you'll see sea lions that are migrating all up and down the California coast. They breed at the Channel Islands. The males might head all the way up towards Oregon or Washington State, actually. Female sea lions actually behave very differently than the males. So there are lots of different nuances. But yeah, the sea lions can kind of go a little bit deeper and a little farther offshore than the harbor seals, for example. Same thing as the sea otters. They're going to stay kind of shallower right near the kelp forest. Excellent. I might be getting eyes that I need to stop. I will stick around, though.
Answer some more questions.
Fair enough. I will answer your question.
Do you really work with whales or orcas?
Great question. So whales are, of course, a whole different ball game. They do not fit on the back of a Toyota Tundra like we try and get most of our animals. I've been reaching out to Toyota Tundra. They refuse to make a commercial for us. But so in the case of a whale, it'll be a much bigger thing. There's actually a great talk that's going to happen later today that I recommend for anyone at 3 p.m. Peggy Strapp from the Whale Entanglement Team is giving a talk, because whales is a big community effort, basically. So it's policied under NOAA, so the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, but you've got a whole bunch of groups that try and work with it because it's extraordinarily dangerous to try and do a disentanglement with a whale, and it takes a lot of resources. With all that being said, we do help with whale entanglements and any whale issues. One of my favorite stories is, it's a few years back at this point, but there was a mom and baby humpback whale pair that were swimming up the Sacramento River. We named them Delta and Dawn. Immediately not something that should be happening. So we got our team out there. We realized the mom and the baby had been hit by boats. They had these huge cuts in their side. But no one had ever tried taking care of a wild whale before out in the ocean. We got creative. We partnered with all these different groups, the Coast Guard and other groups. We went out and we actually rigged a harpoon gun to deliver medicine. And we actually gave them medicine out in the middle of the Sacramento River, a first in terms of medical care for whales. And it worked. After a couple days, the wounds started to heal up. We kind of turned them around, guided them right out under the Golden Gate Bridge. Haven't heard from them since, which in our business, kind of the best thing you can hope for. So there's a mixture. It's not as clear-cut as some of the examples that I gave you, but our goal is to be able to provide help to any marine mammal that needs it throughout that 600-mile range. Any last questions? All right. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.